Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's WSBA Crypto Roundup for June 28th, 2024. I'm here with my amazing co-hosts, Ron Quaranta and David Brill, and I'm Josh Klayman, and we're here for this Crypto Roundup. We're excited to get started, but before we do, just a few of the usual disclaimers. One, nothing we say is legal advice, investment advice, tax advice, accounting advice, any kind of advice, except for David's crystal ball. Also, what we say here, these are our thoughts. They're not necessarily the thoughts of the WSBA or of our employers or of any other person other than ourselves. And sometimes we're still thinking them through. So with that, we're off to the races. And wow, it's been a busy day already. And Ron, I know, like, as we were just getting started, you mentioned that it's almost pointless to try and come up with a list of topics because they're changing by the minute. What is going on? And can I just say, no more Chevron deference?
It has been crazy, and for everyone in the audience, thank you all for joining us. If you've got questions for Josh or David and I, put them in the chat. We'll address them as quickly as we can. And Josh is alluding to this ongoing joke I have that we shared topics for discussion a few days prior, and they're already old and outdated. So Josh, to your point, it's been a crazy day, and I know a lot of people are talking about the debate from last evening. I think we'll avoid that for a little bit. Crypto didn't come up, which is interesting. David, I don't know if that was in your crystal ball. But one of the things we've seen this morning, a couple of big things. Certainly, a lot of Supreme Court decisions, Josh, have been put forward. One overturns the Chevron doctrine from, I believe it's Chevron v. someone in 1984, which really is seen by many opponents of Chevron as an opportunity to reel in the administrative state. So there are a lot of organizations and certainly a lot of conservative groups that looked at that. I think it's going to take a lot of thought, Josh and David, around what does that mean for our industry in the future. And even things like, I believe it was yesterday, the court overruled the use of administrative courts by regulators. And I haven't dug too deeply into that, David and Josh. I'd love your opinion. I don't think it removes all administrative courts, but certainly when you look at an organization, an agency like the Securities and Exchange Commission, they've pretty regularly used administrative courts. And I think one of the justices had noted, well, you can't be the judge, the jury, and the prosecutor all at the same time. You know, it kind of violates the Constitution. And I understand that there are dissents to that. But to me, it was really like administrative courts, the agency wins something like 90+% of the time. But if you go to actual courts in the judiciary, it's something like a little over half of the time. So it really causes pause. But I try to look at it through the lens of our industry broadly. I think it changes a lot of dynamics on how we look at things. I think it may change the impact of ongoing litigation, but this has been one of those wackiest news cycles that I've seen in a long, long time. And we didn't even talk about inflation, David.
Yeah, David, what do you think? What are your thoughts today? Is your head spinning?
My head's spinning. I mean, look, I think there has been in the Supreme Court this view that the administrative state is taking, a larger piece of what gets done in Congress and just in legislation and how we govern, and it's gotten too big. And I think several of these cases have started to, winnow that down some. And I think when you layer on our crypto, factors where a number of people feel like the government is acting outside of the rules or analyzing the rules in a way that's inconsistent with the way the case law has been applied. This all plays nicely together when you are, in litigation with the government. And, I think Paul Grewal at Coinbase, had put this nice little chart out about how the government keeps changing, how they're negotiating certain parts of the ecosystem. And at one point they say, no, government, the SEC shouldn't be governing marketplaces for tokens. And then later on they say, well, yes, it does fall under the SEC. And then, one part they say, well, the token, looking over at token projects, the law is very simple here. It's very clear. And then later on they say, well, no, it's not that clear. And so he did it much more justice than my, simple regurgitation of his chart, or at least attempted to, because I don't have it right in front of me. But I think you're seeing, a court that wants justice to be merited out in a traditional way of, traditional federal courts making decisions, applying the laws from the administrative bodies, but not allowing this judge, jury, executioner type scenario.
Yeah.
I wonder, Josh, if I could just weigh in on one thing, and I want to
Sure.
give deference to the other side of that perspective. I haven't even had a chance to read some of the dissents that were put forward by the court, but a lot of people use the phrase administrative state, David, but I would argue, what is the other side of that argument? Is it perceived as simply more efficient to have a regulator have their own internal administrative court? I just wonder, does this gum up the works in a way and make things take even longer? I'm not necessarily saying I disagree, but it's an interesting perspective.
Well, look, I think on one hand, in-house courts, you do get individuals who are knowledgeable in that part of the law.
Yeah.
And so you're having someone who understands why, how the agency works, how different rules and regulations have been promulgated, and their application to a series of facts that are presented before them. But, and I hate using these words, but I guess the court, you could say one of the things the court was concerned with is that there's this sort of organizational bias that takes over where if you work in the agency, you're part of the rulemaking process, you're part of the agency's mantra, and cases are brought before the agency, where you have, protagonists, we'll call them, who may or may not have broken the agency's rules. Is that person and that agency going to be a fair arbiter of the facts? In a case like that, and a lot of times these cases involve people's liberty or their, life pursuits and, whether they can operate in an industry or not. And the court feels like there needs to be some checks and balances there with, federal courts or courts outside of the administrative courts adjudicating some of these. So I support this. I think it's an important movement by the court. And at the same time, I do think it adds a level of fairness to the process. What do you think, Josh? Hopefully I've summed that up well, but I've tried.
I think you have. I mean, I think going back to the Chevron deference being struck down by the Supreme Court today, over an hour ago, just for those listening or watching at home or wherever you may be, Chevron deference, it goes hand in hand with the major questions doctrine in a lot of ways. And so if we think about what a lot of the ongoing litigation, whether it's affirmatively against the SEC, right? What we've seen brought, for example, by consensus in the Northern District of Texas, or whether it's cases that the SEC has brought or maybe thinking of bringing where people have used the major questions doctrine as some kind of affirmative defense, right? I think it's a really interesting change in dynamic because the whole thing with Chevron deference is, as I know you guys know, but others might not, it really gave regulatory agencies kind of flexibility to interpret laws that Congress may not have made crystal clear, right? Where there was some ambiguity or vagueness. And people had said, well, if Congress passes a law, they don't know all the ways that it's going to, the way the world will change, things like that. And that, if regulators only had those specific powers that Congress expressly provided to them, then lots of regulations would be potentially vulnerable to attack, on legal bases. So I think here, maybe this will change the tide in a big way. I mean, in my view, although I'm not within people's minds and I'm not privy to, non-public conversations about it, but I believe that one of the reasons that the Northern District of Texas has been chosen for many of these suits against the SEC is that traditionally the Fifth Circuit hasn't shown deference to Chevron deference, right? There wasn't really a warm and fuzzy feeling towards it. So I think, with the Supreme Court saying, hey, it's out the window, then really the question of whether something is a major question, maybe courts will be forced to look at it a little bit differently. But what do you guys think?
I agree with you, and I do support David to your point. I support this on a philosophic basis. to me, I always try to look at the, what's the immediate impact. So like a lot of the work that these agencies are doing, some of them can be changed or move in a different direction fairly quickly, but there's a lot on an SEC's plate. Those generally don't turn on a dime. I guess the question I have, and we'll certainly address this in our policy update next week with shout out to Dina Ellis and Adam Goldberg. They'll be joining us next Tuesday. The question I have is, it seems like the philosophy of the court is, if you don't like this, Congress, then create laws about it, Congress, because that's sort of your job. And I'm certainly paraphrasing. I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone, any of the justices at the Supreme Court. But I wonder, if we look at Congress and how it operates in the United States today, will that make things take even longer? And, we keep talking about, certainly there's draft legislation on stablecoins, and there's, Josh, you and I and David have spoken about Fit 21. It feels like there's this trend to push things back towards the legislature to do that work of drafting and passing laws. But candidly, they haven't been able to seem to do much of anything. Am I misperceiving?
I think they've done something, Ron. I think they have come up with legislation that I think, although I think all of us thinks there's areas for improvement, they are really meaningful first steps to getting sort of a legislative framework around our space.
Yeah.
But look, you have to remember too, a lot of people will say that the commission should have been using their trading and markets and corp fin groups to be developing the market structure for, the crypto ecosystem, and that it should have originally emanated from there. And, that's not happened. So I'm certainly not giving Congress a free pass. Let me be abundantly clear about that. But I do want to say that I feel like there's been a good faith effort made, especially on the Republican side of the caucus, to come up with bills, or, you also have Lomas Gillibrand. So, there have been important members of Congress who've really tried to move the ball forward. But, as we all know, we need both sides to play along, and that just hasn't happened yet.
I feel like Josh and I are just about to say regulatory sandbox again once we get over all of this. It'll be interesting to see if that's ever going to be a possibility, Josh.
Yeah, who knows? Honestly, I feel like so much of this is like, who knows? Even going back to what David, you and Ron had talked about before, about like how much credibility can we, or how much faith can we put in statements of, frankly, presidential candidates, but other candidates, of whether they will in fact remain and be pro crypto. I think that's one of the things where, David, I'm relying on your crystal ball, because certain candidates are talking the right talk, right? And I'm curious to see. It was really interesting. I don't know if you guys were watching the crypto markets last night during the debate.
Yeah.
Yep.
But they were moving just like the stock market was. Yep. And yeah. See, you guys have me watching all kinds of things.
We've turned Josh into a degen.
But we're sorry to Josh and her family.
Yeah. What I will say is this, and again, I know I have a view, and I'm really trying to be even tempered about it, and even minded when I share, but I just feel from the actions, how much you want to discount the words, you can discount the words. I do believe that if we did have a Republican administration come in, that the gloves would come off crypto, and that I think there would be reasonable legislation that would come in. And I think Operation Choke Point 2.0 would cease over a bit of time. I think we would have an SEC chairperson who would be more favorable to crypto, and maybe it would be Chairman Commissioner Pierce. And I guess I'm still skeptical about, the Democrats' intentions vis-a-vis crypto, solely crypto. And I base that on the last 4 years of what we've all been dealing with collectively. And, look, this pivot to crypto by the Democrats, in the last waning hours, I think we need to see more of it before we can judge the authenticity. But I do want to add that I saw two things that have been highlighted on X. I won't take credit for these, but definitely made me, chuckle. One was someone pointing out that, the government is selling some of their Mt. Gox Bitcoin, and they're selling it through Coinbase, which I certainly support. But this is the same Coinbase that they said are acting as an illegal broker. So could you imagine if the SEC had taken some shares from a company, but NASDAQ was under some violation that they weren't acting properly? Oh yeah, it's okay. We have a enforcement action against you, NASDAQ. We'll just let you sell the shares anyway. So there was some hypocrisy in that, it felt. And then the other one is the idea that that the administration may take crypto donations, I think really after the Trump administration did. And so my favorite joke is, well, if we, if people were to donate crypto that doesn't have a real definition in the SEC's mind, does that mean, the administration would be profiting off of unregistered securities? And that's kind of a funny issue. So I think in the way I kind of look at it is like, what are the facts on the ground? Like beyond the words, what have we seen and what are the actions? And I think that's the best way to decide whatever party you support, what do you think they may do in the future?
I'm going to dare to slightly disagree with David, Josh. And for the record, for everyone in the audience, I am working very hard to wean myself off of needing to understand David's crystal ball and like predict against it. I will just go away from wagers like that. And David, I agree with you, and I understand that. Party aside, it seems that there are certainly folks in the Congress that are on the Republican side that are more supportive. An administration change will probably empower them to be able to move some things forward. But I think, the former president and the current president suddenly weighing in as pro-crypto is just about the most cynical grab for percentage votes that I could possibly imagine. I take it as a cynical, and we've talked about this. We've talked about the fact that, and again, thank you for everyone in the audience. Please tell me I'm wrong. These elections are so tight that sub a percentage point or two matter. So if these kind of positions, and bluntly hypocritical positions in some instances, help them get 0.5% of a vote someplace, they're going to go after that. They need those votes.
Were you guys? Oh, well, I mean,
Where does she start, David?
Yeah.
I think Josh has a little bit of Switzerland in her.
Exactly. I mean, were you guys surprised at all that crypto didn't make the presidential election bingo card?
No,
I didn't. I think anyone in the industry who thought crypto was going to be top of mind in the first debate between these two candidates was just misleading themselves. And I don't know that anything good would have come out of it being a talking point for either of the candidates. I simply don't think. I just don't think debates are what they used to be. Again, politics and political party aside, there's very little statement of policy other than the other person's policy is really, really terrible and going to cause World War III. Who's a felon or not? It is just, I'm going to go off script here a bit for both of you. You're both friends and know me a long time. It was just kind of a shameful performance across the board to me.
I mean, delving into golf handicaps was...
Golf handicap. Like, if that's the barometer to choose world leaders, we've got bigger issues than crypto.
Yeah, we really had... Go ahead, Josh.
I was just going to say, Ron, you have a fan, Larry Miller.
Mr. Miller. Shout out to Larry Miller. Shout out to Larry Miller, WSBA member, one of the sharpest legal minds I've met in quite a while. Barring obviously David and Josh. Sorry, Larry. No, but I appreciate the kind comment. Yeah.
I want to throw a shout out to the Fair Shake Crypto PAC, which has raised over $150 million since the end of May, and up through the end of May, I should say, and deploying those resources in campaigns against people who were anti-crypto. And I read that they deployed some of those campaigns to advocate for the candidate who ran against Jamal Bowman. And he was eventually defeated, and he was a very anti-crypto congressperson. So look, we've talked about this ad nauseum, but, getting the name out, getting, creating a PAC and advocating for positions is really an important part of the legislative process. And so just a shout out to Fairshake for, putting the money behind the mantra and going out there and making a difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Josh, I was just total joke, but I'm waiting for David to run for some office.
I mean, I guess we'll see. He was very careful with what he just said about Congress.
You noticed that. You noticed that. Very politician-y, David.
Oh, I'm just drafting off of Josh, so
Oh boy.
Well, okay. So one thing, just looping back for a second, David, I heard you say the words choke point 2.0, and I think that leads us into one of the other really fascinating developments of this week, which are the two suits against the SEC. Well, one against the SEC, one against the FDIC, with respect to FOIA requests and basically trying to get access to materials that have been blocked. Now, the one with the FDIC, as I understand it, that is expressly relating to whether, and I think we all believe that there is a choke point 2.0, but just materials and information on that. And the other with respect to the suit against the SEC, that related, my understanding is, related to the termination of the Wells notice with respect to consensus and the question of whether ETH might be a security in the SEC's eyes, as well as Zachary Coburn going all the way back to Ether Delta, in the time machine, and another enforcement action as well. So what do you guys think of this? I mean, what's going to happen?
David, you go first, buddy.
I'm going to focus on the FDIC one. I do think that we deserve clarity on whether there is an unofficial policy to make it really difficult for banking crypto companies. And I think that, look, we're regulating American businesses, or maybe there's some national businesses, but there are a lot of American businesses. And if, the FDIC and is sort of giving its mandate to its member banks that they don't want to bank crypto businesses, then the businesses have a right to know this and have a right to advocate against this. And it shouldn't be done in sort of this shadow manner. And I think that's the lack of transparency and sort of having to hear about it secondhand, I think really makes this FOIA request meaningful to, companies in the community. And, I do hope the FDIC complies with the requests, and I hope we get the answers.
I'm going to go X-Files conspiracy theory on David again today. And I'm sorry, buddy. And again, I don't disagree with you in the content of what you're talking about, but I think there will never be instances where this is a clear policy to kind of, initiate an Operation Choke Point 2.0. I don't think it's a policy discussion, and I hate to get all philosophic about it, but it's a philosophy discussion. And it's a philosophy discussion because these are the perspectives of some of the people in these regulatory agencies about what they see as risks to the financial system, as counterterrorism risks, as anti-money laundering compliance risks. So I just don't think there's this kind of star chamber of regulators sitting around saying we've got to boot XYZ company off of the financial system. That there may be. I don't know, but I simply think it's a function of the political philosophy of the administration and the hirees of the administration at any particular time.
Well, I guess the question is, when banks are being examined or they get bulletins from the FDIC, are they subtly or not so subtly being told, to really reconsider whether these high-risk companies, as they'd be described, are bankable, and will you meet your supervisory obligations by banking them?
Yeah.
So yes, I don't think you're going to see those terms in documents. Yeah. I mean, I would imagine, but we've all seen crazier things in discovery, so I don't want to.
We have.
But I do think it's really important that there is visibility and sunshine on what's going on, and everybody has a right to know what the policies are.
Agreed. Josh, if I could, to Larry's comment, can you please describe the FDIC case procedural posture? You probably know it better than I do, Josh or David, and I don't have the link in front of me. Larry, we can certainly send that after the broadcast. But if anyone wants to dive in on that or has the link handy, that would be great.
Yeah, I can try and pull up the links and share them after from like Court Listener or whichever website has like the free transcripts. My understanding is that there's a consulting firm called History Associates or something that was used in connection with filing suit. And my recollection, this may be incorrect, Larry, so my apologies, but my recollection was that the suit it's filed in a district court in Washington, D.C., and it's the allegations are that the FDIC, at least with respect to that one, has been refusing to comply with FOIA requests. And it's alleging that the FDIC is causing banks to, essentially debank crypto, right? And trying to cut them off from the federal banking system. So that's my understanding of what it is right now, and that it's focused on Operation Choke Point 2.0.
We'll dig out the links for participants and for everyone who couldn't join us. Thank you, Larry, for raising it. Josh, I guess a question for you and David. Totally my ignorance. Is there a deadline for FOIA requests? I mean, I keep seeing these like so-and-so agency is not responding to this FOIA request. Are there mechanics there that anyone's aware of?
I mean, there are definitely mechanics. I can't cite them chapter and verse, Ron, but there are mechanics, and it is another check and balance that you have, to make sure that people have access to documentation, in a representative government. So I think that it's important. I don't know them chapter and verse, but I'm sure they can be found with a little digging.
I am not digging over FOIA information over the holiday. Sorry, Josh.
No worries. I mean, I have no knowledge about how long one has to respond, but my impression was that the trading platform that brought the suits it wasn't that necessarily, I might be wrong, but it wasn't necessarily that the agencies had not responded at all, but they'd actually denied access to the information over alleged concerns about jeopardizing ongoing enforcement actions.
Okay.
So I think this move is to ask a court to compel the agencies to provide the information.
Got it. Interesting.
Yeah. And I want to add, I'm reading from this here, but I want to add a shout out to my friend Nick Morgan with ICANN. He was part of a group that submitted an amicus brief along with Mark Cuban, Elon Musk, and a few others, ensuring the right to a jury when the SEC pursues fraud claims seeking civil penalties. So I just wanted to, shout out to them. I think that was really good work on their part. And another check and balance for individuals that if they're going to have civil penalties, that, a third party or a federal court would be the ultimate arbiter of those claims and whatever, fees or economic loss occurred. So I just want to send a shout out to Nick for his good work there with ICANN.
Good work, Nick. Will you talk to Elon about it the next time you see him, David?
I'd love to have Nick on one time because he's a really interesting guy, and his group has been filing a number of amicus briefs, a number of these crypto cases, as well as, in these broader sort of civil procedure matters within the court system.
Nice.
So just switching gears for one moment, something that surprised me, although maybe it shouldn't because I've been hearing rumblings about it, but the fact that Van Eck filed for a spot Solana ETF, I thought that was very interesting timing. Of course, it's, on the heels of the SEC withdrawing the Wells notice in respect of ETH, but isn't the case still ongoing? The Binance case, granted, it never brought suit against Solana, right? But I had thought that was one of the tokens that had been named, and I'm just curious, like, why this move? Why now? What next?
I'm going to weigh in to the extent I have any kind of knowledge. David, I'd love your deeper perspective on it because you've seen that process and you've been through that process. I just think it makes sense to get it out there at this point early on. And I suspect that they're looking at the tea leaves of the Ethereum spot ETF approval. Just might be enough of a momentum to push something like Solana forward, irregardless of whatever case does or doesn't get brought. And you can always withdraw an S1, right, David? Well, you can always withdraw the form. To me, I just thought it was them being, future forward, thinking about the strategy of ETFs in the future.
Yes, I thought it was very, part of me thinks it's clever. Part of me thinks it's opportunistic. Part of me thinks it's dead in the water. So it's sort of like a real mix of everything. I think seeing the Ethereum ETF approved and sort of thinking about what would be the next ETF approved for crypto, I think Solana was somewhat of an obvious choice. XRP might have been that choice, but they're still embroiled in the litigation, so I don't see that being the way to go right now. So I think as a first in line for filing of a new crypto product, I think that makes sense. I think they've made some arguments and some podcasts I heard that you don't need to have a futures market ahead of a crypto ETF, and pointing the surveillance sharing that goes on and sort of those type of issues. On the flip side, I just don't think that the status of Solana, based on what you said with the Binance case and it being named in that complaint by the commission, I don't know. It feels like that needs to get resolved one way or the other before the Solana ETF would go forward. Otherwise, it seems like that would certainly be a detriment to the commission's case against Binance.
Can I make one interjection there, Josh? Again, a slight joke, but I was texting some colleagues, and I think I posted in our Slack channel. I said, well, the Shiba spot ETF is next. That didn't go over quite as well as I thought that joke would have gone over, but I wanted to share it with you and the audience.
Boy, Ron's waiting for that day. Ron is waiting for that day.
But listen, I shout out to Steve Ehrlich. He was our guest last week, and it was great to have him. He said something really interesting and again, I'm not shilling for Shiba. To Josh's disclaimer, we're not promoting tokens. I'm not recommending it as an investment. But when you look at the use cases and some of the work that developers are doing, they're arguably working to do some stuff, leveraging that blockchain versus a lot of the what tokens and coins we've seen out in the ecosystem. Again, that's not investment advice, please.
We understand. One of the things I was thinking with the Van Eck filing is it's interesting that it's just a few days, I think maybe like 5 days after they filed for something similar in Canada. And Canada is interesting to me because we have the Howey test in the US, and they have Pacific Coast Coin, which is based on a very similar test intentionally. And as we have Howey and its progeny, my recollection is, although not a Canadian lawyer, all caveats apply, that they have similar follow-on cases that bring it very close to our Howey test. And so I wonder whether there may be a strategy there, right, to see whether it can get through in one jurisdiction that has a similar test. And just some thoughts.
Look, I think it makes sense that, if you think there's going to be one at a certain point, to get ahead of it. And, maybe it spurs any type of litigation about the status of the token. So, I think it's an interesting gamble, but I think you don't have a lot to lose if you're Van Eck here. I think you can sort of play it out and see how it goes. I don't think there's a lot to lose here because you file an application, even if you have to withdraw it, you're not, discriminated against from refiling it at a certain point, or when things get, change or things evolve. So I think it's an interesting play by them, and certainly curious to see how it's going to be treated.
I got to say, shout out to Greg and the international reach of members of the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance. We've got to get Greg on up in Toronto, but really good points. 3IQ filed a preliminary prospectus in Canada for a Solana ETF. Pacific Coin Exchange test, almost identical to Howey. Although I wonder if regulators, Josh, in Canada are saying it's the ecosystem that matters versus efforts of others, but I'll leave that debate aside for a little bit.
Oh, this is interesting. Greg also says he thinks that Van Eck has an interest in 31Q or 3IQ. I don't know which. Is it 3IQ or 31Q?
3IQ.
3IQ. Interesting. That would make sense. I wanted to, can I pivot us, Josh?
Of course.
Only in our world, when David and I are waiting for data to come out on a Friday morning from the Fed, could that get buried in the headlines between debate conversation from last evening and the Supreme Court just data dumping all of these cases? But I think it's worth bringing up the macro stuff.
Yeah, please do. Please, definitely.
So for the audience, and thank you all for joining, the Federal Reserve here in the U.S., their preferred inflation indicator called the PCE, which Personal Consumption Expenditures Index, which they believe is the better measure of inflation, slowed to its slowest pace since, I believe, David, it's 2021. I haven't plowed into the data. I will ask about David's crystal ball on this because it really ties to, will there be interest rate cuts? And obviously interest rate cuts bring us back to risk on, which is arguably good for crypto. But, and David, I don't know if you've seen some of this data. There's some underlying data that's always a little frightening to me. One of those is, I think by and large, remember all the free COVID money that everyone got that really gave everyone saving? That's gone.
Yeah.
Totally gone.
What do you mean it's gone? Like, what does that mean?
So when you look at the money supply that expanded because of COVID payments and government subsidies to help people during the shutdowns, for example, that reflected in M1 and M2. So it was deposited in people's savings accounts. People paid down debt. People have, potentially did use some of that for consumption. All of that savings that they had saved up is gone. And what's happening is now, because that money that they put away or had, because there was nowhere to go and nothing to do, has been spent, we're starting to see credit card debt ratchet up. We're also seeing something that I think is really, really underreported, David, and I'd love to see your perspectives. One of the leading indicators is really housing. And the housing supply is up to something like 8 or 9 months, generally in the aggregate. Every region is different. Which means if you want to sell a house, if you sell it in 8 or 9 months, count yourself in the average and lucky. But that number's ticking up as well. And the last time it got up higher than this was just before the financial crisis. So my concern, David, and please, you or someone in the audience tell me you disagree. Everyone thinks the Fed's aiming for a soft landing. I'm afraid that the Fed will have done what Fed Reserve banks usually do, is overshot. And the landing will be harder than we think, while they're trying to cut interest rates. So I'll shut up for a second, but David, tell me I'm wrong.
No, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. I think we have this really interesting dynamic of a lot of people were able to buy places during the pandemic and pay 2 or 3% interest on their loans. And now, these prices have continued to go up, but now the loans are 6 or 7% to borrow against, to get a mortgage. And you have a whole cohort of people who are stuck in these houses or these apartments or where they're living because they're not going to be able to get another 2 or 3% mortgage when they sell. And then, so they're going to have to pay 6 or 7% mortgage when they get a new place. Then the prices have gone up so much that people who are first-time buyers or weren't in the market have to, get a mortgage at 7% on an already inflated property. So we've created this, we'll call it an unvirtuous circle where everybody's a little bit stuck. And I don't think people at the very high end are stuck. I think they have enough liquidity not to have to deal with this. But the majority of people are sort of stuck, and they have to do this analysis. Is it cheaper for me to rent than to own? If I do own and I want to move, how am I going to replace that 2.5% or 3% mortgage I got? And I think, you're seeing a number of, look, and even in Texas and Florida, you've seen a lot of migration here and in Texas, and, property values, screamed up. And then now you're sort of hitting this place where people can't afford these, properties, especially at the higher interest rates. So it's really caused this dynamic that's very difficult. And I think when you take housing and food, I think unanimously, I think people would agree that food is more expensive than it was a couple of years ago, no matter where you fit in the economic, what class you're in. It's tough for people. And so I don't think that's surprising. And I think there could be a real estate hard landing.
Yeah, I mean, just not that I have any special data, but I really do like going to open houses and looking on realtor.com and Zillow and all these things just for fun. And I noticed that just in the past maybe month or two, they included something, maybe longer, don't fact check me, but they added in, I think on realtor.com, the ability to search for homes where there is an assumable mortgage,
Right.
which never existed before.
Yeah.
So I think that's very much, I think you guys are very right.
By the way, can I do one last? Larry, I see that comment. We'll get to it in 2 seconds. Can I kudos to Greg Murphy, who's throwing out St. Louis Fed data at us as we talk about this, which of course he knows I'm going to read. And as far as open houses, I think David's got one of the mansions up for sale on the East Coast. Josh, you could schedule a walkthrough there if you've got some free time in the coming week.
No, you got one more year before darling daughter goes to college. Then, but I'll be waiting out the Fed here a little bit myself.
Yep. Absolutely. And I just want to dive into Larry's comments because I think they're really, really well said. 2 other dimensions now in the economy. Unrealized losses banks now carry on low rate loans, absolutely against the elevated interest they pay. So the kind of loan imbalance that they carry and the dropping occupancy rates. It's a really good point in office buildings. And I know we're going far afield from crypto and I'm really sorry, but I think the Journal, Larry, to your point, carried an article that in the aggregate, something like most offices in the United States. And I don't know how they're defining offices. Is it small office parks, is it towers, on average have 25 to 30% occupancy.
Yeah.
That's a lot of real estate to hold without people paying money to be in those spaces.
Yeah, that's a real problem. And I don't think the mood is going to shift about forcing too many more people to work. I think there are some companies that have done it. There's some companies that may, but I think it's something that people are really enjoying and I think thriving in this hybrid environment. So I think, the rules are really going to change for the long term.
I mean, everyone's been talking about the commercial real estate coming collapse, and to Larry's point, I get that. It'll just be interesting to see who ends up holding the bag.
Yeah, and I also think it's going to be city specific.
I
think those cities that have seen more challenges, internally in those cities and where people are either reticent to come in or just are able to work at corporate campuses outside of those cities, I think those cities are going to struggle more. I think that's going to play out too. So I think that's going to be interesting. But I do want to flip back to crypto a little bit.
Yes, sorry.
I'm thoroughly enjoying our macro view here. And I love, Josh, how you're jumping in. And I can totally picture Josh becoming a house voyeur to see the different, discounts. I totally are.
I am. I actually, this is just a quick aside. I went to go look at a house that was directly next to my sister's house, and I had to avert my eyes because I realized that it had been a house where a law school classmate had lived. And I was like, I don't want to be in this bedroom.
Josh will not look at a house unless it's got an affinity pool and a landing pad for the helicopter. So let's level set for the audience about what we're talking about, Josh.
Yes, and at least an acre of privacy too. So, it makes it easier. But I didn't know you were a Zillow maniac, Josh. So,
I am.
But one thing I want to say is I wanted to talk about the Ethereum ETF because my sort of crystal ball thinks that we may see trading right around or about July 4th. It's being reported that the view is that the last round of comments were not that substantial and that, this may get approved right around July 4th and maybe trading the second week of July. So I think that could be an interesting catalyst for the market.
Are you worried, David, about the inflows not being proportionally the same for the ETH spot ETFs as they were for the Bitcoin?
I'm not. I don't think anybody has that expectation.
No.
I think there's a couple of interesting challenges. I think on one hand, the crypto knowledgeable, I'll say, who want to have exposure to it and who can have exposure in their online trading accounts will avail themselves of that. I think you're going to still have this whole swath of individuals who can't access it through their brokerage accounts, through the wirehouses. So I think you're going to see it play out the same way. I think 20%. 20-25% is a win.
Yeah.
I think in the first instance, as long as they run smoothly, and they price appropriately and run smoothly, that's a win.
Yeah.
And it's just another opportunity in the ecosystem for people to get involved. So I'm taking that approach.
Yeah. One of the I want to say it was a TradFi research firm. I could be wrong. It might have been one of the big wirehouses had predicted a 6,500 point price point for Ether post their a spot ETF, which is a pretty interesting leg up. David, it'll be interesting to see. But you mentioned wirehouses, which is really interesting. You and I have been talking about, Morgan Stanley included, and some of the other wirehouses. There's been this rumbling that the wirehouses will be getting in. I'm going to make a prediction here, David. And the reason I'm doing this is, and you've said this very, very eloquently for a long time, and a lot of others have. If we're going to look at Bitcoin as gold, consider Ether the silver as its complement to that. I think once some of the wirehouses see both of those available, it gives them a bit more of a menu to offer clients across their platforms. I think post an ETH ETF, spot ETF, we'll start seeing some of the wirehouses offer it to some of their clients. But I bet you they're going to wait till after the summer.
What do you think, Josh?
Well, I continue to be interested in what's going to happen, assuming approval, right? With all of those ETH held by the spot ETFs not being staked, right? And I wonder what effect that may have on staking rewards, right? For those who do stake, as well as whether we'll see, I think right now, I can't remember the figure. Is it like 22% or so of ETH is staked or something like that?
Sounds familiar.
Whether that percentage will be the same, but be 22%, so a larger percentage of the free floating, because we have to carve out the spot ETF holdings. So I'm just curious to see what that will be.
Yeah, and I would say, like, when you think about that too, I would say, are we going to see? We may have already seen some filings for like maybe a ETF that's like 70% Bitcoin, 30% Ether, and like C1 wrapped together. So I think that could be interesting. And then I'm also curious to see if people are going to try and do like small buckets of maybe the major altcoins, maybe like a top 5 or top 10 tokens, and try and do some kind of bundling there to like give you exposure and sort of a fund of maybe 8 or 10 different cryptos, and see what the reactions are to that. I think you're going to see a lot more permutations come out over time.
There was an interesting article that Wall Street and institutions are coming for the meme coins in some way, probably through the lens of let's make sure it's not entirely crap and that we can actually be part of it. But for some of those smaller tokens, David, are there still problems around more surveillance agreements, in unified data and price points, and there are still some of those infrastructure problems for some of them, correct?
Yeah, but look, like we've seen NVIDIA and how popular that is. And, I've talked about themes when we talk about crypto tokens, but there could be, somebody files an ETF for a basket of AI tokens. It's not far off. And it's not something that I think is unreasonable. Or gaming tokens. We've talked about that as a theme, and how I think that's really, a theme worth following. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here. And maybe there'll be some softening. But the last thing I want to say on this topic is I'm really curious to see in this election cycle, are we going to see any more cases brought against protocols? And I don't mean Wells notices being filed, but actual complaints being filed against protocols in the next few months. And I mean, especially not fraud related, just protocols that are active in the marketplace, but the commission has a different view about their status. I think that will be one interesting to see in the next, we're in June, so we'll say 4 months until the election.
Interesting. Josh, if I could, I've got I wanted to raise something interesting because we've been talking about meme coin.
Yeah.
And David mentioned gaming. And karma has come back to bite me. I remember on a broadcast the three of us had done quite a while ago, and we had asked you, Josh, are you a gamer, if I remember it correctly. I literally was on a webcast with someone, and they asked me the same question, and my mind just went blank. And I said something like Candy Crush or some like ridiculous app on my phone that was not directly Web3 related. So I just wanted to say, karma came back and bit me for asking you about gaming, Josh, several weeks ago.
I mean, we're all gamers. We're all gamers. Everything's gamified or is becoming gamified. True. So you can think about it broadly. But One thing also, I'm trying to think of all these different things. I think we're continuing to see these delistings. I know we talked about this before about Tether, but I think just in the past day or so, I saw that Bitstamp also delisted Tether. So I think the effects of coming into compliance with Mika are going to continue
Right.
to have an effect on stablecoins. And I think we don't yet have a federal stablecoin law in place. It'll be really interesting to see what's coming next and whether this may have any effect on movement towards that.
Interesting.
Also, I wanted to give a shout out to Rob Schwartz, the general counsel of the CFTC. He had posted on LinkedIn. He said, Thank you for all of the condolences and kind words about the passing of Chevron versus Natural Resources Defense Council. Fortunately, the hashtag CFTC has rarely needed to rely on it. Keep calm and carry on.
Well said.
That is well said. No, I think that's very interesting, for sure. So what fun plans do we have going into this weekend?
Josh, you can go first. We've been talking too much.
Fun plans. What are those? I'll just be hanging out with my kids, and I want to read this Chevron deference decision because, frankly, I was in the middle of a meeting, and someone let me know that this decision had just come across, and I haven't had a chance to actually read through the decision. But yeah, I mean, I'm excited to catch up. I really feel like my answer is the same every week because there's always something, to the point like where we started, where it's almost silly to start saying what we're going to talk about because it's just
It's pretty fast moving.
Yeah, but I'm excited about it. I think I'm also just, this is not fun and exciting either, but I'm really reading a lot about just thoughts after last night's debate.
I'll go next. So we will be actually on hiatus next week, the three of us. I don't know if we talked about it, but we're probably going to take July 5th off. We'll be back in 2 weeks. As my wife tells me, we're going to take July 4th or 5th off, or else. You've both met my wife, so she's serious about it. Like you, Josh, I'll be reading some of these, some of the court decisions, just to understand what it does to crypto. I want to dive into a news article I had seen yesterday, and I haven't really had an opportunity. 2 items, actually, that I haven't had an opportunity to look at. One is Tezos is back, apparently, in some way, shape, or form. I'm trying to wrap my head around what that means for the ecosystem. And I had seen another article, David and Josh, and I'd love your perspectives. The now second largest exchange, which is, I guess, picking up the slack from the collapse of FTX. I believe it's an overseas exchange called Bybit, if I recall the news correctly. And I probably should be paying more attention to that. I want to understand that because honestly, I wouldn't want 2 of the largest exchanges in the world that are focused on crypto to be future FTXs again. And I don't know what the implications of Bybit are. I don't know enough about them. Again, no disparagement of the company or the organization. I just don't know enough about them. It was an interesting thing to see. So I'll be diving into that, usually over a nice little cocktail or something. But that's it for me.
Okay. Well, I'm going to be heading up to New York next week and celebrating July 4th up in New York. I'm going to really try and take a swing at Chris Dixon's book. It's been sitting on my desk here, and things have been fast and furious. So I want to take a look at that. And then I'm also going to be looking at the agenda for our Wall Street blockchain event in October, which I'm looking forward to. And I think we'll be moving that forward shortly. So I'm going to take a look at that and work on refining it with Ron and Josh here, and looking forward to having more to talk about on that.
Looking forward, everyone. Should we leave it there, Josh?
I think so. I mean, I just realized I guess we won't see each other again before the July 4th holiday.
Yeah.
So I hadn't realized. Yeah.
I don't think we have any working group meetings. We do have a policy update next week with Dina and with Adam. We'll get that out on the calendar. It'll be again on LinkedIn Live and on Twitter. We'll add YouTube as well. David, I want to point out one interesting thing for everyone in the audience. We can tell, different portals and different platforms, and there's a count for each of us who's watching on what. And David, you and I will get high double digits, and then I look at Josh's numbers usually, and it's like add a 0 to that. It's just like thank God, Josh. Occasionally, you get us to those 3 or 4 digit kind of views, but I'm grateful, and it's always such a privilege to chat with you both.
Same. And I've never seen these numbers, but I'm happy people are watching.
We have the admin portal. I'll share the data with you.
So my last crystal ball is that I think that the ETH ETF is going to trade before our next roundup.
Oh God, he's almost daring me to bet. Yeah, he's right. They will.
Well, wait, is our next roundup on Friday of next week or the
No,
next?
that's July 5th.
Ooh,
I will be
I don't think I'm going to bet against David this time. I think I'm going to follow David's crystal ball.
Everyone in the audience knows I am sick and tired of losing to David's crystal ball. So I will not even wager. He's right. Let's just go with it. All right, Josh, David, thank you so much. For everyone in the audience, thank you so much for joining us. If you had additional questions for Josh or David and I, please email us info@wsba.co. We will be back in 2 weeks. Have a great Independence Day holiday for those of you celebrating in the U.S. Josh, David, as always, a privilege, my friends. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.